A man once set out on a long journey across a barren wilderness where the earth was cracked beneath his feet and the sky stretched endlessly above him without mercy. He carried a small bag filled with stale bread, the kind that keeps you alive but never truly satisfies. At first, he believed it was enough. He told himself that survival was all that mattered. But as the days passed and the sun burned hotter, a deeper hunger began to grow inside him, not just in his body, but somewhere far deeper, somewhere he could not explain. One evening, when his strength was almost gone, he saw something in the distance. It looked impossible, almost like a dream. A long table standing in the middle of nowhere, covered with fresh bread, warm and abundant. And beside it stood a man, calm and still, as if he had been waiting all along. The traveler hesitated, gripping his bag tighter, afraid to let go of what little he had. The man looked at him and said gently, "Why do you hold on to what cannot satisfy you when life is right in front of you?" The traveler looked down at his stale bread, then back at the table, his heart torn between fear and hope. Slowly, with trembling hands, he took a step forward. When he tasted the fresh bread, something changed instantly. The hunger that had haunted him faded, not just physically, but deep within his soul. As he stood there, filled in a way he had never experienced before, he expected the journey to end. But instead, the man told him to go back into the wilderness. Confused yet transformed, the traveler walked forward again, only now he was different. The same harsh sun beat down, the same dry land stretched ahead, but the emptiness inside him no longer controlled him. Days later, he began to notice others, people wandering aimlessly, exhausted, clutching their own bags of stale bread. He saw their desperation, their quiet suffering, and recognized his former self in their eyes. One man sat beneath a broken tree, too weak to continue, whispering that nothing in life could satisfy him anymore. The traveler knelt beside him and spoke softly, sharing about the table, the bread, and the man who offered life instead of survival. At first, the man doubted him, holding tightly to what little he had, afraid to believe in something better. But as the traveler spoke, something began to stir within him, a small spark of hope that refused to be ignored. This is where the truth becomes clear, because the table was never just a place and the bread was never just food. The one who stood there was Jesus Christ, and his words echo even now. "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall never hunger." The traveler came to understand that what he had received was not temporary relief, but something eternal. He no longer walked to survive, he walked with purpose. And as he continued, more people began to find the same truth, not because the wilderness disappeared, but because they discovered a source that sustained them beyond it. The most astonishing part was that the bread never ran out. No matter how many came, there was always enough, more than enough. And maybe this is not just a story about a traveler. Maybe this is about you. Because in a world full of endless options, constant noise, and temporary satisfaction, many are still walking through a quiet wilderness inside, chasing success, approval, and fulfillment, yet feeling an emptiness that nothing seems to fill. The truth is simple but powerful. What you feed your soul matters. Temporary things will always leave you hungry again, but true hope satisfies completely. It doesn't fade, it doesn't expire, And it doesn't depend on circumstances. It transforms you from within. So now the question is not whether the bread of life exists. The question is whether you are willing to let go of what you've been holding on to. Whether you are ready to step forward, even with doubt, even with fear, and receive something greater than anything this world can offer. Because you were never meant to live empty. Never meant to walk this life constantly searching and never finding. You were created to be filled, to live with purpose, peace, and unshakable hope. The story does not end there because something even deeper began to unfold within the traveler as he continued walking. The bread he had received did more than remove his hunger. It changed the way he saw everything. The same wilderness that once felt like a place of suffering now became a place of purpose. Every step he took carried meaning, every encounter held possibility, and every moment seemed guided by something greater than himself. There were nights when the wind howled and the darkness pressed in, and for a brief moment, the old fear would try to return. He would remember the emptiness he once carried, the desperation, the endless searching. But then, something within him would rise, a quiet assurance, a steady peace that reminded him he was no longer alone, no longer empty, no longer lost. It was as if the bread he had received was still sustaining him, not physically but spiritually, moment by moment. One evening, as the sky turned deep shades of orange and purple, he came across a group of travelers gathered around a small fire. They were arguing, their voices filled with frustration and hopelessness. One spoke of success that left him feeling hollow, another of relationships that failed to satisfy, and another of wealth that only created more anxiety. The traveler stood silently for a moment, listening, realizing that each of them had been chasing something different, yet all had arrived at the same emptiness. Slowly he stepped forward and sat among them. At first, they ignored him, too consumed by their own thoughts. But then he spoke, not loudly, not forcefully, but with a calm certainty that carried weight. He told them about the journey, about the hunger, about the table, and about the one who stood there offering something beyond anything they had ever known. The group fell silent. One of them scoffed, shaking his head, unwilling to believe. Another leaned in, curious but cautious, and one simply listened, as if every word was reaching a place deep within his soul. The traveler realized something important in that moment. Truth does not force itself on anyone. It invites, it waits, it calls gently, and each person must choose whether to respond. Days later, as he continued on his path, he began to notice something remarkable. The more he shared, the more his own understanding deepened. The more he gave, the more he felt filled. It didn't make sense in a worldly way, but it was undeniable. This bread, this life, was not something that diminished when shared. It multiplied. And then came a moment he would never forget. He reached a high ridge overlooking the wilderness he had traveled through. From that height he could see paths crossing, people wandering, some lost, some searching, some sitting in quiet despair. And suddenly, it all became clear. The wilderness was not the problem. The problem was that so many were walking through it without ever finding the source of true life. Tears filled his eyes, not of sadness alone, but of understanding. He realized that the greatest tragedy was not the struggle people faced, but the truth they had not yet discovered. And in that moment, he made a decision. He would not keep this to himself. He would continue walking, continue sharing, continue pointing others toward the bread of life. Because this was never meant to be hidden. It was meant to be known. And maybe, right now, this message is reaching you for the same reason. Not by accident, not by coincidence, but because somewhere within you, there is a hunger that has not been satisfied. A question that has not been answered. A longing that refuses to go away. You may have tried to ignore it. You may have tried to fill it with distractions, achievements, or temporary pleasures, but it remains. Quiet, persistent, waiting. And here is the truth. What you are searching for is not something the world can give you. It is not found in what you accumulate, achieve, or control. It is found in who you turn to. The bread of life is not distant, not hidden, not unreachable. It is offered freely, patiently, lovingly. But you must choose. You must decide whether to keep holding on to what you know is not enough, or to step forward into something greater, even if it feels uncertain. Because every person who has ever found true hope had to take that step. And when they did, everything changed. So as this story continues in your heart, let it not just be something you hear, but something you respond to. Let it challenge you, move you, awaken something within you that cannot be ignored. Because you were not created to wander endlessly in a wilderness of emptiness. You were created to live with purpose, with peace, with a fullness that does not fade. As the traveler continued his journey, something even deeper began to unfold within him. Not just a sense of peace, but a growing understanding of truth that reshaped the way he saw life itself. The words he had heard, the presence he had experienced, they began to echo in his mind, not as distant memories but as living guidance, and slowly he began to remember more of what the one at the table had said, not just about bread but about life. He remembered how Jesus Christ had not only said, "I am the bread of life," but had also spoken of a deeper hunger within every human soul, a hunger not for things, but for meaning, for connection, for truth. And as the traveler reflected, he realized that this hunger was never meant to be ignored or numbed. It was meant to lead him somewhere, or rather, to someone. One morning, as the first light broke across the horizon, the traveler sat quietly and recalled another teaching. Do not work for food that perishes, but for food that endures to eternal life. At first, those words had seemed confusing, almost impossible to live out. But now, they made sense. He saw how his entire life had been spent chasing things that faded, achievements that needed to be repeated, approval that could be withdrawn, success that never truly satisfied. It was like trying to fill an endless void with temporary solutions. And yet, the teaching of Jesus pointed to something entirely different, a source that did not fade, a fulfillment that did not depend on circumstances. As he walked further, he encountered a young woman sitting beside the road, her face filled with frustration. She spoke of her life, of how she had done everything right, followed every rule, pursued every goal, and still felt empty. The traveler listened carefully, and then he shared another teaching he had come to understand. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. He explained to her that the very hunger she felt was not a sign of failure, but a sign that her soul was searching for something real, something beyond what the world could offer. The woman looked at him, tears forming in her eyes as if for the first time her emptiness had meaning. The traveler began to see a pattern in every person he met, different stories, different struggles, different paths, but the same longing. And with each encounter, the teachings of Jesus became clearer, more alive, more powerful. He remembered how Jesus spoke about the heart, saying that life is not defined by what we have, but by what fills us within. He spoke of peace, not as the absence of problems, but as a presence that remains even in the midst of them. He spoke of living water, of a source that, once received, would never run dry. And this is where the traveler's understanding deepened even more. The bread of life was not just about removing hunger. It was about transformation. It was about becoming someone new. He realized that when a person truly receives this life, their desires begin to change. What once seemed important loses its grip, and what once felt distant becomes essential. Love becomes deeper. Forgiveness becomes possible. Purpose becomes clear. There were moments when the traveler still faced challenges, moments when the wilderness felt overwhelming again. But now, instead of searching outward, he turned inward toward the truth he had received. He remembered another teaching. "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And in those moments he experienced something extraordinary, not an escape from difficulty, but strength within it. A rest that was not physical but spiritual, a calm that could not be explained, only experienced. As time went on, the traveler no longer saw himself as just someone who had found the bread. He became someone who carried its message, not with force, not with pressure, but with quiet conviction. He understood that every person's journey was different, but the invitation was the same: to come, to receive, to be filled. And maybe this is where the story meets you again. Because the teachings of Jesus are not just words from the past. They are alive, relevant, and calling out even now. In a world that constantly tells you to chase more, achieve more, become more, his voice offers something radically different. Not more striving, but surrender. Not more accumulation, but transformation. Not temporary satisfaction, but eternal fulfillment. So the question becomes deeply personal. What are you feeding your soul today? Are you holding on to things that you know will not last? Are you chasing something that keeps leaving you empty? Or are you ready to turn towards something greater, something real, something that truly satisfies? Because the truth remains unchanged. The bread of life is still being offered. The invitation is still open, and the promise still stands. Whoever comes will never hunger again. Now bring this story into today, into your world, into the life you're living right now. Because the wilderness is no longer just sand and heat and distance. It looks different now. It looks like crowded cities, glowing screens, endless notifications, and lives that seem full on the outside, but feel empty within. Today, people are not walking through deserts. They are scrolling through them. Endless content, endless comparison, endless noise. And yet, beneath all of it, there is still that same quiet hunger, the kind that shows up late at night when everything is silent, the kind that asks questions no achievement can answer. Why do I still feel this way? Why am I not satisfied? The traveler's story is repeating itself everywhere. There are people building careers, reaching goals they once dreamed of, and still feeling like something is missing. There are people surrounded by others, constantly connected, yet deeply lonely. There are people chasing success, wealth, recognition, only to arrive at a place where they whisper, "Is this all there is?" And this is where the teaching of Jesus Christ becomes more relevant than ever. Because when he said, "Do not work for food that perishes," he was speaking directly into this kind of life, the kind where everything is temporary, everything fades, and nothing truly satisfies. Look around. Trends change overnight. Success is measured one day and forgotten the next. Approval comes and goes. Even the things we work hardest for can disappear in a moment. And yet, people continue to feed their souls with these things, hoping that this time it will be enough. But it never is. And deep down, people know it. That's why anxiety is rising. That's why so many feel restless, overwhelmed, constantly searching. Because the soul was never designed to live on temporary things. It was designed for something eternal. Think about it. How often do people say, "Once I achieve this, I'll be happy," and then they reach it, and the happiness fades. So they set another goal, and another, and another. It becomes a cycle, chasing something that always seems just out of reach. This is the modern wilderness. Not empty of things, but empty of true fulfillment. And right in the middle of it, the same invitation still stands, not louder than the noise, not forced, not overwhelming, but steady, patient, waiting. I am the bread of life. In a world that tells you to consume more, do more, be more, this message is completely different. It says, "Come, receive, be filled." And that feels almost too simple, doesn't it? Because we are used to earning things, working for things, proving ourselves. But the truth of the bread of life is not about earning, it's about accepting. It's about recognizing that no matter how much you achieve, there is a deeper need that only one source can satisfy. Look at people today who seem to have everything, and yet speak openly about feeling empty. Look at how many are searching for meaning in self-help, in trends, in temporary escapes. None of these are wrong in themselves, but none of them can replace what the soul truly needs. Because the soul doesn't need more information. It needs transformation. And that's what the traveler discovered. Not a new strategy for life, but a new source of life. Imagine what would change if instead of constantly chasing fulfillment, you lived from it. Imagine waking up not driven by pressure or fear, but grounded in peace. Imagine facing challenges not with anxiety, but with a quiet confidence that you are sustained by something greater. This is not just a spiritual idea. This is a lived reality for those who truly receive it. And here's the most powerful part. It's available to anyone, right now. Not based on your past, not based on your success, not based on how good or ready you feel. The invitation does not change, but the response is personal. Because in today's world, it's easy to stay distracted, easy to keep scrolling, keep chasing, keep avoiding the deeper questions. But those questions don't disappear. They wait, patiently, persistently. What am I really living for? What truly satisfies me? Why do I still feel empty? And maybe, just maybe, those questions are not problems. They are invitations. Invitations to stop feeding on what you know will not last, and to turn toward something that will. Because the truth remains the same, no matter how much the world changes. True hope satisfies the soul, not temporarily, not partially, completely. So as you listen to this in your own life and in your own moment, ask yourself honestly, what have you been feeding your soul, and is it truly enough? If this message speaks to you, don't let it pass like just another video. Let it stay. Let it challenge you. Let it move you towards something deeper. Share this with someone who might be feeling the same way but doesn't know how to express it. If this message touched your heart, don't ignore it. Share this story with someone who might be walking through their own wilderness. Like, share, and subscribe to Parables of Hope and become part of spreading truth that can change lives. Your support helps this message reach more hearts across the world, and together we can bring light where there is emptiness. Watch more videos from Parables of Hope, stay connected, and continue growing in faith. Because in the end, the greatest truth is this: you were never meant to live hungry. You were meant to be filled.